you are welcome to ABKM Tutorials. In today's class, we're going to talk about anti-ulcer drugs classification. These are drugs used in treatment of peptic ulcer. When I look at it on the board, there are different classes of drugs used in treatment of peptic ulcer in respect of their mode of actions. So today, stay with me to know these drugs and to know their mode of actions and to know the example of drugs that belongs to each group. Here with me today, I'm having one of this group, which is called the reduction of gastric acid secretion, or you call it gastric acid secretion inhibitors. These are particular drugs that will inhibit or that reduce the secretion of hydrochloric acid. Remember, in our previous video we talked about mechanism of acid secretion, and this is exactly where the drug works. Here under the reduction of gastric acid secretions class, we have H2 receptor blockers. H2 receptor blockers, there are drugs under reduction of acid secretion drugs used in treatment of peptic ulcer that goes direct, when administered, it goes directly to the receptor of the histamine, meaning H2 receptor, to bind with it, thereby preventing the histamine from binding. And you know work of histamine during release of acid. If histamine fails to bind the receptor, there will not be secretion of hydrochloric acid, or there will be diminished in secretion of hydrochloric acid. So this is the work of H2 receptor blocker. They block the receptor of the histamines. An example of H2 receptor blocker, or the drugs that belongs or that fall under the H2 receptor blockers, are cimetidine, ranitidine, and famotidine. These are drugs that belongs to H2 receptor blockers. Then, secondly, we have PPIs. PPIs means proton pump inhibitors. Proton pump inhibitors. What this drug does, by the time they are administered, it goes directly to the proton pump to inhibit the work of proton pump. And the work of proton pump is to release hydrogen ion. So, therefore, if this drug is administered, it inhibits the release of hydrogen ion, which will prevent the secretion of hydrochloric acid. Example of proton pump inhibitors are omeprazole, lansoprazole, and rabeprazole. These are drugs that fall under proton pump inhibitors. Then the next one we have is anticholinergics. Anticholinergics, remember in our discussion under the mechanism for acid secretion, we mentioned cholinergic receptors. These anticholinergics, by the time they are administered into the body, they block the cholinergic receptors, meaning where acetylcholine binds to it, they will block that area to stop acetylcholine from binding, which will reduce the secretion of hydrochloric acid. Example of anticholinergics are pyrazapine and proparthenin. Pyrazapine and proparthenin are an example of anticholinergic agents. Then we have another class called the prostaglandin analog. Remember, we talked about prostaglandin in the previous video, where we say the work of prostaglandin is inhibit the work of other drugs, other chemicals, like histamine, gastrin, and acetylcholine that triggers the release of acid. Then prostaglandin, what it does is to inhibit their own action. They reduce the action of these chemicals that enables acid secretion. So in this aspect, you administer prostaglandin analog. Before your body, the prostaglandin you are having in your body might not be enough to fight against these chemicals like histamine, acetylcholine, and gastrin. So therefore, you need an additional prostaglandin, and that is why you administer prostaglandin analog. An example of prostaglandin analog are misoprostol and also rioprostil. Rioprostil and misoprostol are example of prostaglandin analogs. So these are classes of drug or subclasses of drug under reduction of gastric acid secretion. These classes you see here, they are those drugs that inhibit or reduce the secretion of hydrochloric acid by acting on certain places of parietal cell. Then we have the second class, which is acid neutralizer or gastric acid neutralizer. Here, they don't have effect on reduction of acid secretion. Rather, the acid is already secreted. What they do is to neutralize the acid. And how do they neutralize the acid? By mixing together. By the time they are administered, they mix themselves together with this acid in form of base to neutralize it. Then, in the acid neutralizer is made up of two subclasses. We have the systemic acid neutralizer and non-systemic. In systemic is the type of acid neutralizer that goes all around the digestive tracts, where as far as that hydrochloric acid will get to that area, this drug tends to follow the acid to that area. Sometimes we're having gastroesophageal reflux disease, where there will be reflux of the gastric acid back to the level of esophagus, and also that of duodenal ulcer, in case of duodenal ulcer, where the acid goes into the duodenum. In systemic gastric acid neutralizer, it goes all around those areas to neutralize this acid. An example of systemic acid neutralizer are sodium bicarbonate and sodium citrate. They are examples of gastric acid neutralizers. They also have non-systemic. In non-systemic, it acts on a particular area within the stomach to neutralize the hydrochloric acid compared to that of systemic. An example of non-systemic is magnesium hydroxide and magnesium trisilicate. These are examples of non-systemic acid neutralizer. Then the third class is ulcer protective, or we call them protective agents. In this class, what they do not inhibit secretion of acid or to neutralize acid, no. But what they do is to protect. They form coats. They form coats to bind themselves on the wall of the stomach to prevent ulcer. What they do is to form coats. By the time they form coats, they bind or they embed themselves on the wall of the stomach to prevent the stomach from being wounded or injured. And injury of the stomach is what refers to ulcer. That is what this drug does. By the time they administer, form coats and embed in the wall of the stomachs and intestine to prevent ulcer. An example of protective agent are sucralfate and CBS. CBS means colloidal bismuth substrate. Colloidal bismuth substrate, the example of protective agent or ulcer protective. Then we also have another one, ulcer healing. Here already the wound is already developed. You don't have any options. Maybe you fail to fail these processes. The only option you have is to heal the wound or to heal the developed wound. And then an example of ulcer healing drugs are carbenoxolone sodium. Carbenoxolone sodium is just an example of ulcer healing drugs. Then lastly here we have anti-H. pylori, anti-helicobacter pylori. Helicobacter pylori, we all know is bacteria, intestinal bacteria that causes peptic ulcer. It's the major cause of peptic ulcer. Then for you to manage this, for you to manage the condition of peptic ulcer caused by Helicobacter pylori, you have to apply such drug, which is very, very effective. Example of anti-H. pylori are amoxicillin, clarithromycin, metronidazole, trimidazole, and tetracycline.